Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about T.S. Eliot's poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. This was Eliot's first professionally published poem. So in a way, it really marks sort of the beginning of his career. And it definitely suggests the kind of stylistic approach and thematic concerns that would really mark high modernism, of which Eliot is one of the premier practitioners. This is very much a poem that, while not as fragmented as something like The Wasteland, is moving toward that style. It is told from the perspective of J. Alfred Prufrock, a sort of aging... I don't know that much about him necessarily, but he's an aging guy. He seems to be sort of declining into decrepitness, and he's very worried about how people will perceive him. But this is also more or less a stream of consciousness type poem, as Prufrock, the speaker, works through these sort of concerns and anxieties about whether or not he should go to this particular party, and how he sees himself within the world is really a significant component of this poem, in both that it reflects sort of the individual thought process, which was the core of stream of consciousness writing, is the core of stream of consciousness writing, but also it reflects existential anxieties. This poem was published in 1915 during World War I, and so it's in that sort of, it's a sort of early entry into the poetry of anxiety related to World War I and the incredible devastation and carnage brought about in supposedly civilized Europe. It also reflects sort of larger existential anxieties just about the nature of life, living, the movement toward death, etc., etc. And then it reflects social anxieties about our perception of others and how we see others and how we believe that we ourselves are seen by them. So it's a complex poem. And I actually think it's really quite beautifully written in large portions of it, even though there are portions of it that are very, very difficult to gloss what Eliot actually means by it. So I'm going to read you just some portions of it, so you'll get a sense of these anxieties that Prufrock is working through. So this is the first two stanzas. The first stanza is 12 lines long. The second stanza is a kind of refrain at 2 lines long. So here's the opening portion. I'm skipping the epigraph, which comes from Dante's Inferno, which is basically the epigraph in Italian deals with something along the lines of a character who is happy to report their crimes from life because they are confident that the listener will never be able to return to Earth to report those crimes. So that's the opening bit. And Eliot and the high modernists love quotations, they love epigraphs, they love taking bits and pieces from different places. So again, this is very much in that sort of vein of standard high modernist practice. But this is the actual opening of the poem. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless night in one-night cheap hotels, and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent, to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. In the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. So that's the opening bit. And so already we start to get these social and existential anxieties, right? They let us go, then you and I, let us go and make our visit. Of course, this is the sort of literal thing that's occurring in the world, right? Is Prufrock is preparing to go to a party. He doesn't seem that keen on it necessarily, but the plan is to go. But we have also these stark images that evoke sort of decay and desolation, loss, right? Decay, the sort of crumbling of this society. When the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table, right? This sense of being numbed, being sort of externally dead almost, right? I mean, anesthesia is not death, obviously, but it is like death. It's a numbing. It undermines consciousness. It undermines the person's awareness of themselves and their surroundings. So we've got that element right from the very beginning. And then we get this. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent. This is a sinister city, right? This is a sinister conception of the social space that these characters are going to enter. It is not a sort of warm, pleasant, exciting, inviting city. It is a city half deserted, cheap hotels, tawdriness, this sort of run-down feeling of what the social milieu represents. And this is very, again, quite a common element of high modernism. There's a lot of anxiety among high modernists about life in cities and what it means to be an urban person in the 20th century. And then we get this last bit of the first stanza. To lead you to an overwhelming question, oh, do not ask, what is it? And the what is it is in quotation marks, implying that that is the question. Again, this sort of notion of questions and challenges and problems, things unknown, is really central to the love song. And then the second stanza, in the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo, one of the most famous lines in poetry, or two lines in this case. Yeah, and this is where we sort of enter much more into the social critique of the people at this party, right? This sense that these people are casually chatting about one of the greatest artists in history. It sort of suggests that there's very much this shallowness to the society that Prufrock exists in. This almost self-indulgent sense of just casually discussing the arts against the backdrop of World War I. It's, again, worth sort of keeping that in mind. And nothing about the love song itself specifically evokes World War I. But it was published in 1915. And I think that's a relevant context. I mean, even the reference to half-deserted streets could be read as a reference to how many people have left London either to go to the front or to otherwise participate in the war effort. But this party, these discussions of art, this concern that Prufrock has, that I'll tell you about more in just a second, about appearance, things like this, these come to ring very hollow against the carnage of the First World War. But that's another element that Prufrock devotes a lot of his mental energy to, is how he will be perceived, how he comes across. So we get this stanza a little bit later on. And indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare, and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair, with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. So again, this sense of anxiety about appearance and about one's social status, one's position within society, is really quite central to the poem. Then shortly after that, we get another couple of really, really great lines, great poetic lines, I think. Do I dare disturb the universe? Is a great sort of existential question. But then I think this is actually one of my favorite lines of poetry. It's a much beloved line, I think. Line 51 of the poem, I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. What a great idea. What a great line. But as we move sort of forward in the poem, we increasingly get the sort of fragmentation of Prufrock's thought. And this is really where the stream of consciousness becomes much more apparent. And again, this is not as developed in stream of consciousness as something like The Wasteland or many of the novels of Virginia Woolf or something like this. But we start to get this sense of the fragmentary, momentary way in which human thought is structured. So we get this section starting from line 70. Shall I say I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows? I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. Another great image, another great line and idea. But again, this break, and this is actually divided. We've got sets of 3 dots above and below. So visually on the page, that section is marked out. But the two ideas, going through streets and watching men smoking pipes leaning out of their windows, and I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. They don't seem connected to each other, right? Thematically, ideologically, aesthetically, it's not really clear why these coexist in a section, except that, again, we're getting that stream of consciousness developed, right? That approach of thoughts are coming together, right? Thoughts that don't necessarily make logical sense together, but because they're popping into the speaker's brain, they're ending up on the page. So again, that's a sort of aesthetic style that the modernists were experimenting with. I want to read you one more bit of this. Well, I guess I'll touch on this bit as well. The last portion sort of returns to Prufrock's anxiety about aging and perception. This isn't the final bit, but it's near the end. I grow old, I grow old, I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. So again, that sort of anxiety about growing old, about decline, about social perception, etc., etc. But I wanted to read you this last bit, partially because I, as a literature person, quite like it. But I think it reveals a lot about where the project of high modernism was in 1915. And it is in, I think, a very different place, but a place that is moving toward where it will be when Eliot publishes The Wasteland, which is 1922? 22, I think. Let me try and... Yeah, 22. I thought it was 22, but I wasn't sure if it was 1920. So yeah, I mean, 7 years later, we have in The Wasteland this sense of the fragmentation of culture, European culture in particular, and this deep sense of loss and anxiety about that loss. I think in 15, Eliot is starting to get that sense. And this stanza about Hamlet, I'll tell you that right now. This stanza about Hamlet, I think, sort of evokes that sense of almost the decentering of European culture in the early 20th century. This sort of, if Hamlet is the central figure of the play that bears his name, then Prufrock's association of himself with a minor character gives a sort of, it's a shift, right, in the position of art, of aesthetics, of the modern European subject. And I'm calling Eliot European here. He was born in the US, but he emigrated to Britain. He became a British citizen. He very much, I think, identified as being British. And much of the anxiety that's rooted in high modernism is about the European experience of World War I. And of course, Hamlet is Danish, written by an English author in his most famous incarnation. But this sort of sense. So I'll just go ahead and read you the thing, and then maybe what I'm trying to state here will be a bit clearer. No, I'm not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. I'm an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince, no doubt an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious and meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse, at times indeed almost ridiculous, almost at times the fool. So I think this stanza is really, really striking because, again, I think what it represents is, if Hamlet stands in for sort of the height of European culture and civilization, the height of European arts, the height of everything that Europeans sort of believed was superior about their cultures versus everyone else in the world, then decentering Hamlet, saying, I'm not that, or we are not that, in some sense. The modern world, in some sense, is not the world of sort of the heights of European culture and confidence. It is this peripheral thing, this thing that does not have the gravitas, does not have the, is not admirable in the same way. It is forgettable. It is obtuse. I think it's very, very interesting. And again, by the time you get to The Wasteland in 1922, it is overtly the fragmentation and even collapse of European culture in the face of the horrors of the trenches. But I think, again, we're getting a lot of those elements here in the love song. And it's very, very interesting to sort of read them side by side, actually, and see the development over this 7-year period.